I hate getting attached. I leave before you can. The fear of being seen, safe, but lonely. There's a very specific, very quiet violence in the exact moment you realize you have started to care about someone. It never happens in the middle of a grand cinematic gesture. It does not happen in the pouring rain or under the dramatic glow of a street lamp or during a profound, life-altering conversation. It happens on a completely random, entirely unremarkable Tuesday afternoon. You are sitting in your kitchen while staring blankly at your computer screen at work, or watching the dust motes flow through a shaft of sunlight in your bedroom. You are existing in the perfectly regulated, entirely predictable rhythm of your normal life. And then your phone lights up. It is just a name on a glass screen. It is just a text message, a few digital characters transmitted through the air, entirely devoid of physical weight. But the moment your eyes register their name, your body betrays you. Your chest does this sudden, involuntary drop. It is a terrifying, hollow sensation, like missing the bottom step in the dark. Your breath catches in the back of your throat. For a fraction of a second, your heart accelerates, drumming a frantic, irregular rhythm against your ribs, and a sudden rush of heat floods your nervous system. Society has conditioned us to romanticize this exact physical sensation. We are taught to label this sudden, physiological chaos as butterflies. We write songs about the thrill of the racing heart. We watch movies that tell us this loss of equilibrium is the beautiful, magical spark of human connection finally igniting. We are told that this feeling is the ultimate goal of human existence, the absolute pinnacle of romance. But if you are someone who hates getting attached, you know exactly what that feeling actually is. It is not romance. It is an alarm bell. It is the primal deafening siren of your own nervous system screaming at you that the perimeter has been breached. That drop in your stomach is not the flutter of butterflies. It is the sheer, unadulterated panic of realizing that you are no longer entirely self-sufficient. It is the terrifying realization that your emotional baseline, which you have spent years meticulously guarding, is no longer under your exclusive control. To understand the absolute terror of this moment, you have to look at the architecture of the life you built before they arrived. Before this random Tuesday, you were a fortress. You spent years constructing a highly sanitized, perfectly regulated, entirely self-contained existence. You built thick, impenetrable walls out of independence, routine, and emotional distance. You learned exactly how to manage your own moods. If you were sad, you knew exactly which song to play, which street to walk down, and which cup of coffee to brew to bring yourself back to baseline. If you were anxious, you knew exactly how to isolate yourself until the storm passed. You were the absolute, undisputed architect of your own reality. You woke up every single morning knowing that no one had the power to ruin your day because you did not allow anyone to get close enough to matter. You did not rely on anyone for validation, for comfort, or for joy. You were completely, beautifully untouchable. And yes, it was lonely. The fortress is always lonely. There were nights when the silence of your room felt so heavy it threatened to crush you. There were moments when you looked out the window and for the deep, aching phantom limb, for a connection you refused to allow yourself to experience. But you willingly paid the price of that loneliness because the loneliness was safe. The loneliness was predictable. You traded the highest, most breathtaking peaks of human intimacy for a completely flat, gray emotional landscape, simply because the gray landscape guaranteed that you would never have to fall. But now the phone is lit up, and in that single, terrible fraction of a second, you realize that the fortress has failed, despite all your walls, despite all your cynical defense mechanisms, and despite all your solemn vows to never let anyone in again. A stranger has somehow managed to slip through the cracks in the masonry. You have accidentally become attached, and the absolute worst part of this realization is not the attachment itself, but the devastating transfer of power that immediately follows it. When you get attached to someone, you are committing a profound act of self-betrayal. You are essentially taking the remote control to your own nervous system, the remote control you have guarded with your life, and you are handing it directly over to a person who is entirely unpredictable, entirely autonomous, and entirely capable of destroying you. You have handed them the ability to dictate your emotional temperature. Think about the sheer humiliating absurdity of what happens to your day once you are attached. If they text you good morning with a specific level of warmth, you are instantly euphoric. The sky looks bluer. your coffee tastes better, and you move through your entire day with this light, effortless grace, feeling completely invincible. Your brain is flooded with a synthetic dopamine high, entirely dependent on a digital signal sent by someone else. But if they go quiet, if they take 4 hours to respond to a message, or if they send a reply that feels slightly colder, slightly more distant, or slightly less engaged than usual, your entire psychological structure collapses in on itself. The euphoria vanishes instantly, replaced by a suffocating, paralyzing wave of anxiety. Your mind begins to race at 1,000 miles an hour, desperately running forensic analysis on the last 3 days of interaction, trying to pinpoint the exact moment you ruined everything. You analyze their punctuation. You analyze the timestamps. You stare at the blank ceiling, completely unable to focus on your work, your hobbies, or your own life, because your entire existence has been reduced to a waiting room for their validation. This is the ultimate humiliation of the remote control. You are an intelligent, capable, independent human being, and yet your entire capacity for peace has been hijacked by the typing bubble on an iPhone. You hate getting attached because you hate being a passenger in a vehicle you used to drive. You hate the feeling of sitting in the passenger seat, completely blindfolded, while someone else decides how fast you are going and whether or not you are going to crash into a wall. When you are unattached, your happiness is entirely internally generated. It is small, it is quiet, and it is entirely within your jurisdiction. But when you are attached, your happiness is outsourced. Your peace of mind is placed in the hands of a person who has their own traumas, their own insecurities, their own bad moods, and their own capacity to simply change their mind. You are trusting someone with the most fragile, vital machinery of your soul, and you have absolutely no guarantee that they are not going to drop it on the floor. And this terrifying vulnerability breeds an immediate, toxic byproduct: resentment. You don't just fear the person you are becoming attached to, you begin to actively resent them. You resent them for having this much power over you. You resent them for effortlessly bypassing the defenses that took you years of heartbreak to construct. You look at them across the table at a coffee shop, or lying next to you in the dark, and mixed in with the profound, undeniable affection is a sharp, bitter edge of anger. You are angry at them for making you feel this out of control. You are angry at them for being so compelling, so beautiful, and so necessary to you, that you are willing to risk your own safety just to be near them. But beneath the anger directed at them is a much deeper, much more devastating anger directed entirely at yourself. You are furious with yourself for falling for it again. You promised yourself you wouldn't do this. You promised yourself you would keep things casual, that you would maintain your distance, that you would keep one foot firmly planted outside the door so you could make a quick exit the moment things got dangerous. You swore that you would never again allow yourself to be reduced to the anxious, desperately waiting version of yourself that you despise so deeply. And yet, here you are, checking your phone every 3 minutes, feeling your stomach plummet when their name doesn't appear, analyzing the microscopic shifts in the tone of voice. The resentment is a defense mechanism. It is the brain's desperate attempt to regain the upper hand in a situation where it feels entirely powerless. If you can stay slightly angry at them, if you can stay slightly irritated by the power they hold over you, you feel like you are maintaining at least a small sliver of your autonomy. You convince yourself that because you hate how much you care, you are somehow still in control of the caring, but you aren't. The remote control is already in their hands. The transaction has already taken place. The fortress has already been breached, the walls have already been compromised, and the alarm bells are ringing so loudly that they are completely drowning out your own thoughts. This is the exact moment the panic truly sets in, because you realize that you only have 2 options moving forward, and both of them require you to step directly into the fire. The first option is to stay. It is to sit there in the terrifying vulnerability of the open field, without your armor, and simply let them hold the remote control. It is to accept that you are going to feel anxious, that you are going to feel out of control, and that you are going to have to trust a deeply flawed human being not to destroy you. It requires an immense, radical amount of courage, because it means accepting that loss and heartbreak are now actual, statistically possible outcomes in your life. The second option is to run. It is to snatch the remote control back before they even realize how much power they hold. It is to build a new wall, instantly and aggressively, right in the middle of the connection. It is to sever the cord, burn the bridge, and retreat immediately back into the cold, gray, predictable safety of your fortress, where you can finally stop holding your breath and go back to being perfectly, miserably in control. And if you are someone who hates getting attached, if your entire psychological framework is built on self-preservation and the avoidance of pain, the urge to run is not just a passing thought. It is an overwhelming biological imperative. It feels like survival. You look at the phone sitting on the table. You feel the crushing, terrifying weight of the drop in your chest. You look at the massive, terrifying unpredictability of another human being's heart, and the sheer mathematics of the risk become entirely too much to bear. You decide in that quiet, violent fraction of a second that the warmth of the fire is simply not worth the absolute certainty of the burn. You decide that you would rather be the architect of your own isolation than a casualty of someone else's ambivalence. And so, you begin to pack your emotional bags, you begin to pull away, you begin to construct the exit strategy, you prepare to execute the preemptive strike, convincing yourself that you are doing the smart thing, the safe thing, the strong thing. But as you start to walk away, as you feel the familiar, hollow piece of isolation begin to settle back over your shoulders, a tiny, devastating truth echoes in the back of your mind, impossible to completely ignore. You are not running because you are strong. You are not running because you are independent, or because your peace is too valuable to disturb, or because they aren't good enough for you. You are running because you are absolutely terrified. And as you retreat back into the fortress, locking the heavy iron doors behind you and returning to the absolute silence of a life entirely under your control, you have to sit with the crushing reality that in your desperate, relentless attempt to save yourself from being abandoned by them, you have just completely abandoned yourself. We are raised in a culture that worships at the altar of the spark. From the very first stories we are told as children, to the cinematic blockbusters we consume in the dark, to the pop songs that score the background of our lives, the narrative is entirely uniform. We are taught that human connection must announce itself violently. We are conditioned to believe that love is not a quiet, gradual building of trust, but a sudden, blinding collision. The cultural script dictates that when you meet the right person, your body will let you know through a series of profound, chaotic physical reactions. Your heart is supposed to race. You're supposed to lose your appetite. You're supposed to lie awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, completely unable to quiet your mind because the sheer electrical current of their existence has rewired your brain. We're taught to chase this physiological chaos at all costs. We call it chemistry. We call it falling. We treat this sudden involuntary loss of equilibrium as the absolute gold standard of romance, believing that if a connection does not completely disrupt your peace, it must not be real. But if you have spent your life building fortresses, if you are someone who fundamentally hates getting attached, you have to look at this cultural mythology with a profound, terrifying skepticism. You have to look at the spark and ask yourself what is actually happening inside your physical body. When you meet someone and immediately feel that violent jolt, that sudden drop in your stomach, the shallow breathing, the hyperfixation on the every word, the inability to sleep, your brain is not actually producing a romantic response. Your brain is producing a survival response. Biologically, the human nervous system cannot distinguish between the thrill of a massive life-altering romance and the sheer primal terror of being hunted by a predator. The chemical cocktail is exactly the same. When you feel the spark, your brain is flooding your bloodstream with cortisol and adrenaline. Your sympathetic nervous system is kicking into overdrive. Your pupils dilate, your heart rate spikes to pump blood to your extremities, and your body prepares to either fight for its life or run as fast as it possibly can. For a person with a secure attachment style, someone who grew up believing that love is safe, that people are reliable, and that vulnerability is not a death sentence, this flood of adrenaline is interpreted by the brain as excitement. Their body says, "This is big, this is important, step closer." But for you, for the person who has learned that reliance is a trap, your brain interprets that exact same chemical flood as danger. The spark is not a campfire meant to keep you warm. The spark is a warning flare shot into the pitch black sky of your mind, illuminating a threat on the horizon. The butterflies in your stomach are not there to signal love. They are a manifestation of sheer, unadulterated anxiety. They are the alarm bells ringing in the watchtower, screaming at you that your perimeter has been breached, that your control is slipping, and that you are about to be deeply, fundamentally hurt. This is the great, devastating tragedy of how we misinterpret our own bodies. We are addicted to the anxiety of the unknown, and we mistake it for passion. Think about the people you are historically drawn to. Think about the connections that felt the most electric and the most all-consuming. Almost without exception, that electricity was not generated by safety. It was generated by uncertainty. The spark is born in the space between what you want and what you cannot secure. It thrives on mixed signals, delayed text messages, emotional unavailability, and the agonizing addictive game of push and pull. When you meet someone who is slightly out of reach, someone who forces you to guess their intentions, your broken radar lights up. The uncertainty triggers your deepest core wounds. It sends your nervous system into a state of hypervigilance. You become entirely consumed by the puzzle of trying to figure them out, trying to earn their consistency, and trying to secure a place in their life. You mistake this exhausting, obsessive hypervigilance for chemistry. You think, I can't stop thinking about them, I must really like them. But you don't really like them, you are just terrified of them. You are terrified of their unpredictability, and your brain is obsessively monitoring the threat to ensure your survival. And the most heartbreaking consequence of this misinterpretation is what happens when a truly safe person finally walks into your life. Imagine meeting someone who is entirely consistent. They say what they mean. They text you when they arrive home. They do not play games. They do not pull away when things get close, and they make their intentions abundantly, beautifully clear. Delphi, a solid, stable ground to stand on. How does your nervous system react to this person? It doesn't. Your nervous system stays completely flat. Because there is no threat, there is no adrenaline. Because there is no uncertainty, there is no cortisol. Your body does not need to sound the alarm, so the room remains entirely quiet. And because you've been conditioned by a lifetime of trauma and a culture of cinematic lies to believe that love must feel like a panic attack, you look at this beautiful, safe, consistent human being, and you feel absolutely nothing. You go on one date, you experience the profound, grounding peace of their presence, and you go home and tell your friends, they are great, but there just wasn't a spark. You walk away from the very peace you have been begging the universe to give you, simply because it did not trigger your fight or flight response. You friend zone safety, and you repeatedly marry the panic. You are entirely trapped in a cycle of seeking out the siren, believing it is a song. This tragic mislabeling of anxiety as chemistry is what fuels the absolute addiction to the beginning of a relationship. For a person who hates getting attached, the first 3 weeks of knowing someone are a masterpiece of psychological control. We love the beginning because the beginning is not actually real. The beginning is a sandbox. It is a highly curated, entirely controlled digital interface. During the talking stage, there are no actual stakes. You have not merged your lives. You have not exposed your deep, lingering insecurities. You are existing in a state of suspended animation, communicating primarily through screens, carefully selecting your words, curating your playlists, and broadcasting the absolute best, most frictionless version of yourself. In the beginning, you are not a vulnerable human being participating in a connection. You are a director producing a film. You are completely in the driver's seat of your own narrative. You know exactly how long to wait before texting back to seem casually interested but perfectly unbothered. You know exactly which jokes to make, which mysterious anecdotes to share, and which angles of your life to keep hidden in the shadows. It feels intoxicating because you are playing a character and the character is flawless. The character does not have a messy bedroom or a history of depressive episodes or an irrational fear of being abandoned. The character is slick, independent, and entirely self-sufficient. You love the chase because the chase is a performance. And as long as you are performing, you are safe from being truly known. As long as you are keeping them at arm's length, managing the flow of information, and dictating the pace of the intimacy, you feel a massive, euphoric surge of power. You get to experience the warmth of their attention without ever having to step fully into the room. You convince yourself that this high, this thrilling game of chess is what love is supposed to feel like. But the game has an expiration date. The tragedy of the beginning is that it eventually has to end. You cannot sustain the performance forever. Eventually, the digital interface gives way to physical reality. Eventually, the carefully crafted text messages give way to long, unscripted silences in the passenger seat of a car. Eventually, the shiny, flawless persona you constructed begins to crack under the weight of actual, sustained human proximity. And there is always a specific pivot point, a microscopic moment where the illusion breaks, the game ends, and the terrifying reality of attachment crashes down on you. It usually happens when they do something entirely mundane, but profoundly intimate. They leave a toothbrush in your bathroom. They casually mention a plan for next month that includes you, using the word we, with a terrifying casual ease. They look at you across a table, not at the curated version of you, but at the tired, unguarded, authentic you, and their eyes soften with genuine care. They cross the invisible boundary line you drew in the sand. They signal that they are no longer just playing the game, they are actually setting up camp in your life. That is the exact moment the spark violently transforms into a siren. The euphoric high of the beginning evaporates in a single heartbeat, replaced by a cold, heavy dread that settles in the base of your spine. The realization hits you with the force of a physical blow. This is real. They are no longer just a fantasy on your phone. They are a living, breathing human being who now occupies physical and emotional space in your world. And more importantly, they are now a person who possesses the capacity to destroy you. The alarm bells that were ringing quietly in the background suddenly become deafening. The cortisol floods your system, but this time, you can no longer mistake it for excitement. It is sheer, suffocating panic. You look at the toothbrush sitting by your sink, and it does not look like a symbol of growing intimacy. It looks like a bomb counting down to your inevitable emotional ruin. Your brain immediately goes into overdrive, running emergency protocols. They are too close. They are asking for too much. I am losing my autonomy. If I let them stay, I will become dependent on them. And the moment I become dependent on them, they will realize I am fundamentally flawed, and they will leave me, and I will not survive the withdrawal. The lettering is twisted, entirely rooted in past trauma. But in that moment, it feels like absolute, undeniable fact. Your nervous system is screaming at you to execute the escape plan. The urge to flee becomes a biological imperative. You feel an overwhelming, almost violent need to push them away, to create distance, to reclaim the sovereign territory of your own life before they can take another step inside. You start to view their affection as a threat. When they text you, you feel suffocated. When they ask to see you, you feel trapped. The very things that gave you butterflies 2 weeks ago now make your skin crawl with anxiety. You convince yourself that they are needy, that they are moving too fast, that they are demanding too much of your energy. But they haven't changed. They are simply acting like a normal human being who's securely progressing toward a relationship. You are the one who changed. You are the one whose defense mechanism just woke up from the dormant state and grabbed the steering wheel. This is the darkest, most agonizing phase of hating attachment. You are caught in a brutal psychological crossfire. One half of your brain is grieving the loss of the spark, wondering why the magic suddenly disappeared, wondering why you always seem to lose feelings the second someone actually likes you back. You tell yourself that they just want the right person, that the chemistry faded, that you just got bored. But the other half of your brain knows the truth. The other half knows that you didn't lose feelings. You were just overridden by fear. You know that you are intentionally sabotaging a good thing, because the concept of a good thing terrifies you more than the familiarity of an empty room. The spark was never a promise of a beautiful future. It was the siren warning you that you were approaching the edge of the cliff. And now that you are standing on the precipice looking down at the terrifying, uncontrollable free fall of actually loving someone, you have a choice to make. You can close your eyes, take a deep breath, and jump, trusting that for the first time in your life, someone might actually be there to catch you at the bottom. Or you can do what you have always done. You can step back from the edge. You can turn around, walk away from the cliff, and begin the meticulous, ruthless, entirely cowardly work of tearing the connection down to the studs. You can begin the architecture of sabotage, burning the bridge before they ever get the chance to cross it, ensuring that you remain perfectly safe, perfectly in control, and entirely, permanently alone. There is a terrifying, silent shift that occurs in the architecture of your mind, the exact moment you realize a connection has become real. It does not happen with a loud crash. There is no grand argument, no massive betrayal, no dramatic revelation that suddenly makes you question everything. The shift is microscopic, It is the quiet, heavy closing of a vault door deep inside your chest. One day you are looking at them and feeling the warm, terrifying rush of affection. And the next day, you look at them and feel absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. The defense mechanisms have been activated. The panic of Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, the realization that you have handed over the remote control, the terror of the siren has triggered an automatic, deeply ingrained survival protocol. Your brain has run the calculations, looked at the terrifying vulnerability required to sustain this attachment, and decided that the risk of staying is simply too high. Your subconscious has already made the definitive decision to leave, but your conscious mind still needs a justification. You cannot simply tell yourself or them that you are running away because you are terrified of being loved. That is too honest. That requires too much accountability, and it leaves your ego entirely undefended. You cannot admit that you are the architect of your own loneliness. So your brain orchestrates a brilliant and devastating psychological magic trick. It convinces you that the problem is not your fear. It convinces you that the problem is not your fear. It convinces you that the problem is them. This is the beginning of the flaw hunt. When you first meet someone, your brain applies a golden filter to everything they do. You are in a sandbox at the beginning. Your dopamine levels are artificially high. During this phase, their quirks are charming. The clumsiness is endearing. The way they talk too much when they are nervous is adorable. You look at them through a wide-angle lens, taking in a beautiful, blurry, romanticized portrait of who you want them to be. But the second the attachment threatens to become permanent, the wide-angle lens shatters. Your brain replaces it with a harsh, glaring, high-definition magnifying glass. You stop looking at them as a human being, and you start looking at them as a crime scene. You put their entire existence under a microscope, actively sweeping the perimeter of their personality for any piece of evidence you can use to disqualify them. You become a detective, trying to build a bulletproof case for why this relationship is fundamentally doomed. Because if you can prove they are flawed, you are completely absolved of the guilt of walking away. You stop noticing the way they make you laugh, and you start hyperfixating on the exact pitch and volume of that laugh, deciding suddenly that it is entirely too loud and embarrassingly grating. You stop appreciating the fact that they always text you good morning, and you start analyzing the specific cadence of those texts, deciding that they are too predictable, too needy, or too suffocating. You begin a systematic, ruthless deconstruction of the very person you were terrified of losing just 48 hours ago. And the most sinister part of the flaw hunt is how incredibly petty it is. We don't sabotage relationships by finding massive, insurmountable incompatibilities. If we found a massive incompatibility, like a difference in core values, or a severe breach of trust leaving would be easy, and it wouldn't be sabotage. It would be healthy boundary setting, but that is rarely what happens. Instead, the architecture of sabotage is built entirely out of microscopic, absurdly trivial details. In modern dating, we have given this phenomenon a name. We call it the ick. We talk about it on the internet as if it is a funny, relatable quirk of human psychology. We share stories about how we completely lost feelings for someone because they ran for a bus and missed it, or because they used a specific emoji, or because they ordered a drink in a weird voice, or because of the way their posture looked when they were tying their shoes. We laugh about how quickly a crush can evaporate over something so entirely insignificant. But the ick is not a joke. It is not a funny random glitch in your romantic preferences. The ick is a highly sophisticated, deeply toxic trauma response. To understand why the brain uses the ick, you have to understand the evolutionary biology of disgust. Disgust is a primal emotion designed specifically to keep humans alive. Millennia ago, if our ancestors looked at a piece of rotting meat or a stagnant pool of water, their brains would flood their bodies with a visceral wave of repulsion. That disgust was a biological command: do not ingest this. Do not step closer. This is poison, and it will kill you. When you have a deeply rooted fear of intimacy, your brain categorizes vulnerability as poison. It views emotional reliance as a lethal threat to your survival. So, when someone gets too close, when they bypass your armor and actually threaten to make you care about them, your brain panics. It needs to force you to step away from the poison. It reaches into its evolutionary toolkit and pulls out the most powerful repellent it possesses: sheer, unadulterated disgust. Your brain artificially manufactures a feeling of repulsion toward the person you're attaching to. A attaching that disgust to a completely arbitrary, meaningless detail. It makes you feel physically nauseated by the way they chew their food, or the way they clear their throat, or the specific shape of their thumbs. It is a psychological hijacking. You are sitting across the table from a beautiful, kind, consistent human being who is actively trying to love you, and your brain is screaming at you that they are fundamentally repulsive because of the way they are holding their fork. And the tragic brilliance of this mechanism is that it works flawlessly every single time. Once the magnifying glass is out, and once the ick has been established, you cannot unsee it. The golden filter is gone forever. The flaw becomes the only thing you can look at. It grows in your mind until it eclipses their entire personality, their kindness, and their history with you. You build an entire narrative around this microscopic imperfection, convincing yourself that this tiny detail is indicative of a massive, fatal flaw in their character. If they use that emoji, you tell yourself, it means they are immature, which means they can't handle a serious conversation, which means they will inevitably let me down when things get hard, which means I have to leave right now before they ruin my life. You execute these massive Olympic-level leaps of logic, connecting a harmless quirk directly to your ultimate emotional destruction. You build a staggering, towering mountain of evidence out of absolute dust, and as you build this case against them, a very specific, very dark transformation happens to your internal monologue. You become incredibly arrogant. To justify discarding someone who has done nothing wrong, you have to elevate yourself above them. You have to convince yourself that you are out of their league, not just physically, but emotionally and intellectually. You start to view them with a quiet, lingering condescension. You tell yourself that you are simply refusing to settle. You frame your self-sabotage as a virtue. You tell your friends that you have high standards, that you are fiercely protecting your peace, and that this person simply wasn't on your level. You look down at them from the cold, lonely watchtower of your fortress, picking apart their humanity, their messy emotions, and their earnest attempts at connection, entirely blind to the fact that their earnestness is exactly what makes them brave, and your condescension is exactly what makes you a coward. Why do we do this? Why do we actively, aggressively dismantle the value of the people we care about? Because of the absolute, fundamental law of the avoidant ego. If they are beneath you, their rejection cannot destroy you. The core terror of attachment is the fear that you will hand someone your heart and they will drop it. You are terrified that they will wake up one day, realize you are not enough and walk away. That potential rejection hangs over your head like a guillotine. But if you can execute the flaw hunt successfully, if you can strip them off their pedestal, tear down their value, and convince yourself that they are actually annoying, flawed, and unworthy of your time, you completely neutralize the threat. You disarm the bomb. Think about the math of the ego. If someone you deeply admire and respect walks away from you, it shatters your self-worth. It is a devastating blow. But if someone you have deemed irritating, clingy, and fundamentally flawed walks away from you, you don't care. In fact, you feel relief. By actively destroying their worth in your own mind, you are building an insurance policy against the pain of them potentially leaving. You are making sure that if they ever do walk out the door, it won't hurt because you have already convinced yourself that you never really wanted them anyway. This is the sinister safety of disgust. Disgust is a shield. As long as you are disgusted by them, you are immune to them. As long as you are picking apart their flaws, you don't have to look at your own. As long as you are shining the harsh, blinding spotlight of the magnifying glass entirely on their imperfections, the room stays dark enough to hide the fact that you are absolutely terrified. And so, the architecture of sabotage reaches its final, devastating stage. You have gathered your evidence. You have blown the microscopic flaws entirely out of proportion. You have manufactured the ick, and you have successfully replaced all your affection with a cold, protective layer of condescension. You have built a rock-solid, completely fabricated case for why this connection is a failure. You have given yourself the permission slip you needed to execute the preemptive strike. You start to pull the thread. You stop asking questions about their day. You let their text messages sit unread for hours, letting the digital silence act as a moat you are digging between the two of you. When you are in the same room, you physically retract your energy, building an invisible, impenetrable wall of ice right down the center of the sofa. You become intentionally difficult to reach, intentionally difficult to reach, intentionally difficult to love. You watch them try to bridge the gap. You watch the confusion wash over their face as they realize the person who was warm and present 3 days ago has been replaced by a stranger. You watch them scramble, trying to figure out what they did wrong, entirely unaware that they are fighting a rigged game in a courtroom where you have already written the verdict. And the sick, twisted reality is that a small part of you actually enjoys watching them scramble because their confusion, their desperation to fix it, is the ultimate proof that you hold the power. It is the final confirmation that you successfully took the remote control back. You are the one orchestrating the distance. You are the one setting the temperature of the room. You are safe. You are in control. But this power is a hollow, rotting thing. Eventually, the sabotage works. Eventually, they get tired of hitting a brick wall. They get tired of the coldness, the mixed signals, and the exhausting, unpredictable whiplash of your defense mechanisms. They realize that they cannot love a fortress that actively shoots arrows at them every time they try to approach the gate, and so they do exactly what you programmed them to do. They pack up their things, they accept the distance, and they walk away. You watch them leave. The door clicks shut. The threat is officially neutralized. The perimeter is secure. The alarm bells in your nervous system finally, blessedly, stop ringing. The adrenaline drains out of your bloodstream, leaving you with that familiar, heavy, quiet piece of isolation. You did it. You protected yourself. You survived the attachment. But as the days turn into weeks and the initial relief begins to fade, the magnifying glass breaks. The artificial disgust evaporates. The high-definition lens of the Flaw hunk dissolves, and the golden filter slowly, tragically, begins to slip back into place. Without the immediate terrifying threat of their proximity, your brain no longer needs to protect you from them. And so, it stops lying to you. You remember the exact sound of the laugh you convinced yourself was grating, and you realize it was actually the most beautiful sound you had heard in years. You remember the text messages you convinced yourself were suffocating, and you realize they were just the consistent, gentle efforts of someone who actually cared if you made it home safe. You look at the microscopic, trivial flaws you used to build your case, and they suddenly look exactly like what they always were, just the normal, harmless, beautiful imperfections of a real human being. The realization crashes down on you in the absolute, deafening silence of your perfectly safe, perfectly controlled, perfectly empty room. They weren't flawed. They weren't the wrong person. They didn't do anything to deserve the coldness you gave them. You did this. You were the one holding the magnifying glass. You were the one who manufactured the disgust to mask your own terror. You were the one who took a rare, beautiful, fragile connection and systematically tore it down to the studs, simply because you lacked the courage to let it stand. You look around the fortress you fought so hard to defend, and you realize the devastating truth of the architecture of sabotage. You didn't win. You didn't protect yourself from heartbreak. You just chose to be the one who inflicted it. You burned the house down with your own 2 hands, entirely convinced that you were saving yourself from a fire. And now, you are left standing alone in the ashes, holding the match, forced to live with the heavy, unshakable ghost of a beautiful thing you ruined on purpose. There's a very specific, deeply tragic illusion that governs the mind of someone who is terrified of attachment. It is the belief that if you can anticipate the pain, you can somehow inoculate yourself against it. We are obsessed with the idea of emotional preparedness. We think that if we can just see the disaster coming from far enough away, we can brace for impact. We believe that heartbreak only truly destroys you if it catches you off guard. And so, the moment we realize we have started to care for someone, the moment the fortress is breached and the attachment becomes undeniable, we immediately begin to run crisis simulations in our minds. We stop looking at the relationship as a living, breathing thing, and we start looking at it as an hourglass that has just been flipped over. We cannot enjoy the beauty of the glass because our eyes are entirely fixated on the sand slowly, inevitably pouring out of the top chamber. We hear the ticking of a clock that no one else in the room can hear. This is the psychological torture of preemptive grief. Preemptive grief is the act of time traveling into your own future devastation. It is the inability to occupy the present moment of your own joy because your brain is already living in the aftermath of a breakup that hasn't even happened yet. You are standing in the warm golden light of a beautiful connection, but emotionally, you are already packing your boxes in the dark. Think about the absolute devastating paradox of how this manifests in real time. You are sitting in the passenger seat of their car. It is a Friday evening. The windows are rolled down, the air is warm, and a song you both love is playing quietly through the speakers. They are driving, one hand casually resting on the steering wheel, the other resting near yours on the center console. They turn their head to look at you, and the golden hour sunlight catches the side of their face. They smile, completely unguarded, entirely present, existing entirely in the beautiful, simple reality of being near you. It is a perfect moment. It is the exact kind of moment you used to lie awake in your empty room and beg the universe to give you. But instead of feeling a rush of profound joy, instead of letting yourself sink into the warmth of the passenger seat and simply enjoy the fact that you are loved, your chest suddenly seizes up. A heavy, cold, suffocating weight drops directly onto your lungs. Your breath gets shallow. You look at them laughing in the sunlight, and you do not see your partner. You see your ghost. In that fraction of a second, your brain violently catapults you 2, 3, or 5 years into the future. You imagine the exact moment it all falls apart. You imagine the final, terrible argument. You imagine the sound of the front door closing for the last time. You look at their hand resting on the console, and you viscerally imagine the physical agony of reaching out to touch that exact spot and finding it completely empty. You imagine having to unlearn them. You imagine the crushing, humiliating pain of having to unlearn their coffee odor, unlearn the specific way they sleep, unlearn the sound of their footsteps in the hallway. You imagine the absolute torture of having to go back to being a stranger to the person who knows the exact architecture of your soul. You are sitting right next to them, their shoulder is practically touching yours, and you are actively mourning their loss. You are grieving the death of a living person. This is the darkest, most isolating side effect of hating attachment. You rob yourself of the only thing that actually matters, the present moment. You cannot experience the high of the connection because you are already trying to metabolize the low of the withdrawal. Why do we subject ourselves to this specific kind of psychological torture? Why do we ruin a perfectly good Tuesday evening by mentally rehearsing a tragedy? Because we operate on the twisted, fundamentally flawed mathematics of the avoidant ego. The avoidant ego treats grief like a financial debt. We look at the depth of our love for this person. We look at how entirely dependent our nervous system has become on their presence. And we calculate the massive, staggering emotional debt we are going to owe when they eventually leave. We look at the bill and we realize that paying it all at once will completely bankrupt us. We will not survive the crash. So, we come up with a brilliant, self-destructive payment plan. We decide to try and pay off the grief in advance in small, manageable installments. We microdose the heartbreak. We intentionally trigger our own sorrow while we are still in the relationship, hoping that if we spread the pain out over the course of the connection, there won't be any pain left to feel when the actual end arrives. We think, if I practice losing them every single day, if I imagine the breakup every time they look at me, then when they finally do walk away, I won't be surprised. I will be immune. We treat preemptive grief as a vaccine. We inject ourselves with a small dose of the poison, believing it will build our antibodies and protect us from the lethal dose. But grief is not a debt you can pay off in advance. Heartbreak is not a virus you can immunize yourself against when you try to brace for a car crash by violently tensing every single muscle in your body before the impact. You do not protect yourself. You actually ensure that your bones will break. The tension is what causes the fracture. If you were relaxed, if you yielded to the momentum, you might have survived with just bruises. But by bracing for the impact, by locking your joints in sheer terror, you guarantee the destruction of your own structure. The same physics apply to the human heart. By tensing your emotional muscles, by constantly bracing for the impact of their departure, you do not protect yourself from the pain. You just ensure that the relationship will fracture under the immense, suffocating pressure of your anxiety, because preemptive grief does not stay entirely contained inside your head. It inevitably bleeds out into the physical space between you and the person you love. When you are actively mourning a relationship that is still happening, your behavior completely changes. You stop acting like a partner, and you start acting like a pallbearer. You begin the slow, meticulous process of emotional withdrawal. If you believe the ship is going to sink, you stop decorating the cabin. You stop making long-term plans. When they talk about booking a vacation for next summer or going to a concert 6 months from now, you give vague, non-committal answers. You hesitate. You introduce a subtle, lingering doubt into the atmosphere because you refuse to tie your future to a ghost. You physically pull back. You stop looking them in the eye for too long because looking into their eyes makes the grief flare up in your chest. You stop initiating physical touch. You stop saying "I love you" with your entire chest, replacing it with a muttered, half-hearted echo. You build an invisible, bulletproof pane of glass right down the center of the bed, ensuring that you can still see them, but you no longer have to feel the terrifying, unprotected warmth of their skin against yours, and you tell yourself that you are just being cautious. You tell yourself that you are just protecting your peace, maintaining your independence, and making sure you don't lose yourself entirely in the connection. But you are not protecting your peace. You are holding awake. And the most devastating part of this entire process is what it does to the person sitting on the other side of the glass. They are entirely in the present moment. They are not time traveling. They are looking at you right now in the reality of the room you share, and they are trying to love you. They are trying to build a foundation. But every time they reach out to hand you a brick, they realize you are already halfway out the door. They feel the chill. Human beings are incredibly perceptive to emotional frequency. They might not have the vocabulary to articulate exactly what you are doing, but their nervous system registers the withdrawal. They feel the sudden, inexplicable drops in temperature. They notice that you look at them with a strange, melancholy distance, even when you are supposed to be happy. They start to feel like they are constantly failing a test they didn't even know they were taking. They try to bridge the gap. They try to be warmer, more reassuring, more consistent. They ask you what's wrong. They ask you if you are okay, if they did something to upset you, if you are pulling away. And what do? You lie. You say, "Everything is fine. I'm just tired. Work has been stressful." You gaslight them into believing that the massive freezing ocean of distance between you is just their imagination. You refuse to let them into the crisis simulation running in your head, because admitting your fear will require vulnerability, and vulnerability is exactly the thing you are trying to avoid. So they are left to freeze in the dark. They are forced to carry the weight of a relationship that you have already abandoned in your mind. They're essentially trying to perform CPR on a connection that you have already declared dead on arrival. And eventually, the exhaustion sets in. Nobody can survive in a freezing room forever. Nobody can sustain a relationship with someone who treats them like a ticking time bomb. The constant reassurance, the constant trying to prove that they aren't going to leave, the constant fighting against the invisible ghost of your anxiety. It drains the life completely out of them. They realize that no matter what they do, no matter how hard they love you, they cannot compete with the tragedy you have already written for them in your head. They cannot convince you to stay in the present because you are utterly obsessed with the funeral in the future. And so the inevitable happens. They break. They reach their absolute limit. They pack up their warmth, their consistency, and their exhausted, battered heart, and they do exactly what you spent the last 6 months agonizing over. They leave. The front door closes. The silence fills the apartment. The empty space in the passenger seat of your car becomes a physical, agonizing reality. And as you sit there, surrounded by the absolute wreckage of the very thing you wanted most in the world, a twisted, sick, entirely toxic wave of vindication washes over you. The avoidant ego steps into the center of the ruins, looks around at the ashes, and whispers, "See? I told you so. I told you they would leave. I told you this wasn't safe. Thank God I prepared for this. Thank God I didn't get too attached." You feel a dark, triumphant satisfaction in being right. You validate your entire worldview. You convince yourself that the world is inherently unsafe, that love is a scam, and that people will always eventually abandon you. But you are ignoring the most glaring, devastating fact of the entire crime scene. They didn't leave because human connection is fundamentally doomed. They didn't leave because you are inherently unlovable, or because they were looking for an escape route, all because the universe is out to get you. They left because you pushed them out the door. You created a self-fulfilling prophecy of absolute perfection. You were so terrified of the ending that you took the pen and wrote it yourself. You starved the relationship of oxygen. You froze the warmth out of the room. You withheld your presence, and you forced them into a corner where walking away was the only sane, healthy option they had left. You didn't predict the tragedy. You architected it, and the tragic irony of preemptive grief is that it completely fails to do the one thing it was designed to do. It does not protect you from the pain. When they actually leave, the heartbreak does not hurt any less just because you spent 6 months rehearsing it. The microdoses of grief did not build your immunity. They just exhausted your immune system. You don't feel numb. You feel completely, utterly destroyed. But the destruction is twofold. You are not just grieving the loss of the relationship. You are grieving the realization that you never actually allowed yourself to enjoy the relationship while you had it. You spent the entire connection living in the shadow of its demise. You robbed yourself of the joy, the peace, the beautiful, terrifying thrill of being fully present with someone who loved you. You paid the ultimate price, the agonizing pain of the breakup, but you never actually got to keep the merchandise. You never got to experience the pure, unadulterated high of secure attachment. You realize, as you sit alone in the quiet, empty fortress of your own making, that you have committed the ultimate crime against your own life. You were so afraid of death that you completely forgot to live. You were so terrified of the hourglass running out of sand that you smashed the glass with a hammer, entirely on purpose, just to get the waiting over with. And now, you're sitting on the floor, bleeding from the shards, staring at the pile of sand, realizing that the only thing worse than someone breaking your heart is the haunting, inescapable knowledge that you broke it yourself. There's a precise, chilling moment in the life cycle of self-sabotage when the panic finally metastasizes into action. You have felt the terrifying drop in your stomach. You have listened to the deafening sirens of your nervous system warning you that the attachment is becoming real. You have conducted the flaw hunt, magnifying their microscopic imperfections until they eclipse the sun. You have lived in the exhausting, time-traveling agony of preemptive grief, mourning the end of the relationship while they are still sitting right next to you. You have endured the unbearable, suffocating pressure waiting for the other shoe to drop, entirely convinced that it is only a matter of time before they realize you are fundamentally unlovable and walk out the door. And then the pressure becomes too much. The anxiety reaches a critical mass, and your brain decides that it can no longer tolerate the excruciating vulnerability of the waiting room. If the execution is inevitable, your ego demands to be the executioner. This is the birth of the preemptive strike. It is the cold, calculated, deeply tragic decision to leave before you can be left. To understand the mechanics of the preemptive strike, you have to understand the sick, intoxicating illusion of power that it provides when you are deeply attached to someone. You are existing in a state of profound powerlessness. They hold the remote control to your peace of mind. Your emotional equilibrium is entirely dependent on their consistency, their mood, and their continued choice to stay. You are the passenger in the vehicle, blindfolded and strapped in, completely at the mercy of their driving. But the exact second you make the internal decision to end the relationship, the entire power dynamic of the universe shifts back into your hands. It happens before you even say a word. It happens in the absolute silence of your own mind. You look at them across the room, or you read a text message they just sent, and a heavy iron vault door slams shut inside your chest. You decide with a sudden freezing clarity that you are done. The relief you feel in that fraction of a second is astronomical. It is a massive synthetic high. The anxiety that has been suffocating you for weeks instantly evaporates, because anxiety requires uncertainty to survive, and you have just removed all the uncertainty. You no longer have to wonder if they're going to leave you, because you are about to leave them. You no longer have to worry about whether you are good enough, because you have just decided that they are the one being disqualified. You have snatched the steering wheel back. You have reclaimed the remote control. In the twisted, traumatized logic of the avoidant brain, the person who cares less is the person who holds the power. The person who is willing to walk away is the person who controls the room. And so, you decide to be the one who walks away. But a preemptive strike is rarely executed with honesty. You do not sit them down, look them in the eye and say, I am profoundly terrified of intimacy, and I am pushing you away because I do not believe I am worthy of your love, and the anxiety of waiting for you to realize that is slowly destroying me. That would require vulnerability, and the entire purpose of the preemptive strike is the absolute eradication of vulnerability. Instead, you execute the exit strategy using tactics designed to keep your ego entirely shielded and their confusion entirely maximized. You orchestrate the discord through cowardice, masking it as strength. The most common tactic is the slow fade culminating in the ghost. Ghosting is not just a modern dating phenomenon, it is the ultimate manifestation of the fear of being perceived. When you ghost someone, you are completely eliminating the possibility of accountability. If you have a breakup conversation, you have to look into their eyes. You have to witness the pain you are causing. You have to answer their questions, and in answering those questions, you risk exposing the terrifying fragility of your own logic. They might see right through your manufactured excuses. They might see the terrified, panicked child hiding behind the heavy iron armor of your independence. You cannot risk being seen that clearly. So, you simply vanish. You stop replying. You let the hours turn into days, and the days turn into weeks. You watch their name pop up on your screen. You see the question marks. You feel the desperate, frantic confusion radiating through the digital interface, and you do absolutely nothing. You sit in your room, entirely silent, letting the void do the dirty work for you. Ghosting gives you a terrifying godlike sense of control. By refusing to speak, you dictate the entire reality of the situation. You leave them suspended in a permanent state of unresolved grief, while you get to walk away with clean hands, telling yourself that you just didn't have the energy to deal with the confrontation. If the ghosting tactic feels too cruel, or if the relationship is too deeply established to simply disappear without a trace, the brain will employ a different, even more insidious strategy, the engineered crisis. This is where you intentionally back them into a corner until the relationship implodes, leaving them holding the matches. You start a massive, unfixable argument over something entirely trivial. You pick a fight on a Tuesday evening about the tone of their voice, or a minor misunderstanding or a completely fabricated slight. But you don't just argue, you fight with a cold, ruthless finality. You refuse to compromise. You refuse to de-escalate. You construct a brick wall of stubbornness, actively rejecting every single attempt they make to repair the connection. You become entirely unpleasable. You criticize their character. You throw their insecurities back in their face, and you push every single button you know they have. You are actively trying to make yourself impossible to love. You are daring them to leave. You push, and you push, and you push, until they finally break. Until they finally realize that they are bleeding out on the floor of a relationship that you are actively trying to destroy. And when they finally reach their limit, when they snap back, or when they finally pack their bag and say, "I can't do this anymore," you feel a dark, triumphant wave of vindication. You get to play the victim. You get to tell your friends, "We just couldn't make it work. They gave up on me. It was too toxic." You successfully engineered your own abandonment, but you forced them to be the one to pull the trigger. Your ego remains completely unbruised, because technically, they were the one who couldn't handle the heat. Why do we go to such exhaustive, manipulative lengths just to end the connection that was actually bringing us joy? It all comes down to the math of the ego and the desperate, frantic protection of the core wound. At the absolute center of the avoidant attachment style is a core wound that was formed long before this relationship ever began. It is the deep, unspoken, foundational belief that you are inherently defective. It is the belief that if anyone ever truly gets close enough to see the unedited, unmasked reality of who you are, they will be repulsed. They will realize that you are not a prize, that you are not special, and that you are not worth the effort of loving. This core wound is the most fragile, agonizing part of your psychological anatomy. If someone you truly love were to look at you, see that core wound, and then choose to walk away if they were to reject you for who you actually are, it would utterly destroy you. It will be a fatal blow to your existence. The ego is the bodyguard that stands in front of that core wound, and the ego's only job is to ensure that the core wound is never ever touched. The ego calculates the math of rejection, and it realizes that the only way to guarantee you are never rejected for who you are is to make sure you are the one doing the rejecting. It is infinitely easier for your ego to process the narrative. I left them because I was bored, because they were suffocating, because they chewed too loudly, and because I simply outgrew them. That narrative makes you the victim. It makes you the one on the pedestal. It reinforces your superiority and keeps your armor entirely intact. The alternative narrative, the one where you stay, you try, you open your heart, and they eventually say, I don't want you anymore, is a narrative your ego literally cannot compute. It is a psychological death sentence. So the ego sacrifices the relationship to save itself. It throws the person you love directly under the bus to ensure that your fragile, terrified sense of self-worth does not have to take a hit. You are not choosing independence. You are choosing the cowardice of the preemptive strike. But because human beings are deeply uncomfortable with viewing themselves as cowards, we have developed an entire cultural vocabulary to rebrand our self-sabotage. We use sophisticated language to mask our profound emotional limitations. We weaponize modern psychology and therapy speak to build an impenetrable defense around our fear of intimacy. When we execute the preemptive strike, we don't call it running away. We call it protecting our peace. We tell ourselves that the relationship was dysregulating our nervous system. We tell our friends that the other person was trauma dumping, or that they were codependent, or that they were simply not aligned with our current season of growth. We use words like boundaries, energy vampires, and detachment to justify the cold, ruthless discarding of a human being who was just trying to get close to us. We live in a culture that heavily enables this exact behavior. The internet is flooded with content that glorifies the hyper-independent lone wolf. We celebrate the person who can walk away completely unbothered. We make memes about blocking people, cutting people off, and prioritizing our own isolation over the messy, difficult, unglamorous work of actual conflict resolution. We have culturally normalized the idea that if a relationship requires you to be uncomfortable, if it requires you to compromise your rigid control, or if it triggers your anxiety, it is inherently toxic and must be discarded immediately. We have completely forgotten that anxiety is a normal part of vulnerability. We have forgotten that being triggered does not always mean you are in danger. Sometimes it just means you are finally being asked to heal a part of yourself that you have been hiding in the dark for a decade. By rebranding our fear as protecting our peace, we give ourselves a moral superiority complex. We convince ourselves that we are highly evolved, emotionally intelligent beings who simply refuse to settle for anything less than absolute perfection. But true peace is not found in an empty room. True peace is not the absence of friction. True peace is the ability to withstand the friction without completely breaking apart. When you cut everyone off, when you ghost the people who care about you, when you execute the preemptive strike every single time the water gets too deep, you are not protecting your peace. You are protecting your trauma. You are acting as a heavily armed security guard for your own brokenness, ensuring that no one is ever allowed to come in and help you clean up the mess. And so, you pull the trigger. You execute the exit. The immediate aftermath of the preemptive strike is exactly what the ego promised it would be. It is a massive, intoxicating rush of freedom. You block their number, you delete the photos, and you take a deep, massive breath of the cold, uncrowded air. You are back in the driver's seat. You are back in the fortress. No one is expecting a text back from you. No one is requiring you to manage their emotions. No one is holding the remote control to your nervous system. You feel incredibly light. You feel powerful. You go out with your friends. You laugh. You reclaim your space, and you tell yourself that you absolutely did the right thing. You tell yourself that you dodged a bullet. But the high of the preemptive strike has a tragically short half-life. It lasts for a few days, maybe a few weeks. But eventually, the synthetic dopamine wears off. The adrenaline drains out of your system, and the heavy iron vault door of the fortress clicks shut behind you, locking you inside. The silence of the room, which initially felt so spacious and liberating, begins to feel oppressive. The space in your bed, which you fought so aggressively to reclaim, begins to feel cold and hollow. You are entirely safe. You have successfully eliminated every single threat to your ego. There is no one left to reject you. There is no one left to abandon you. There is no one left to see your core wound. But there is also no one left to hold you. The illusion of power completely shatters in the quiet hours of the night. You look around the sanitized, perfectly regulated, entirely predictable life you have fought so hard to defend, and the realization hits you with the crushing, suffocating weight of a collapsed lung. Power is meaningless if you have to exercise it in a vacuum. You realize that the strength it took to walk away was entirely misdirected. It doesn't take strength to burn a bridge. It takes exactly zero courage to strike a match, throw it on the wood, and run away while the structure collapses. Fire does all the work for you. Destruction is the easiest, laziest instinct in the human repertoire. What actually takes strength, the kind of raw, bleeding, terrifying strength that you were too cowardly to muster, is choosing to stay on the bridge when the wind starts howling. It is choosing to look the other person in the eye, admitting that you are terrified, admitting that your instincts are screaming at you to run, and asking them to hold your hand while you try to unlearn a lifetime of survival mechanics. You didn't leave because you were powerful. You left because you were weak. You left because you were too weak to tolerate the discomfort of being known. You left because you were too weak to let someone see the unpolished, unedited version of you. You left because the thought of being rejected by them was so paralyzing that you chose to execute the connection yourself, entirely guaranteeing the very loneliness you were supposedly trying to avoid. And the most devastating, haunting truth of the preemptive strike is the realization of what you actually destroyed. You didn't just break their heart, you broke your own. She looked at a rare, fragile, beautiful possibility. A possibility that might have actually healed you. A possibility that might have rewritten the entire narrative of your life. And you threw it into the incinerator simply because you didn't know how to handle the warmth. You burned the house down just so you wouldn't have to worry about a storm hitting you. And now, you are left standing in the ashes of your own choices. You are holding the steering wheel, entirely in control, entirely autonomous, but you have deliberately driven the car directly into a ditch. You are safe, you are in power, and you are profoundly, permanently, agonizingly alone. This is the ultimate tragic illusion of leaving before they can. You think you are beating them to the punch. You think you are winning the game. But the game was never against them. The game was against your own fear. And by walking away, by choosing the isolation of the fortress over the vulnerability of the open field, you didn't win. You handed your fear the ultimate victory, allowing it to dictate the terms of your entire existence and ensuring that the ghost of the connection you sabotaged will haunt the silent halls of your fortress for the rest of your life. There is a fundamental, agonizing contradiction that sits at the very center of the human experience. We spend our entire lives wandering through the dark, screaming into the void, desperately hoping that someone, anyone, will turn on a light and actually see us. We crave visibility with a biological intensity. We want to be known. We want to be understood down to the absolute fragile marrow of our bones. We want someone to look at the messy, chaotic sprawl of our existence and say, I see exactly who you are, and you make sense to me. But the exact second someone actually turns the light on, the moment someone looks directly at us with a clear, unobstructed, loving gaze, we panic. We cover our faces. We scramble backward into the shadows. We hate getting attached because attachment requires intimacy, and intimacy requires observation. It requires you to step into the harsh, unforgiving light of someone else's perception. And if you are someone who carries a deep, unresolved hatred for the person you actually are, being perceived by someone else is not a comfort. It is an absolute existential horror. To understand this terror, you have to look at the mechanics of the beginning of a relationship. When you first meet someone, you do not actually meet them, and they do not actually meet you. You both send your representatives. The representative is a masterpiece of psychological engineering. It is a highly curated, meticulously edited, flawlessly optimized avatar that you have built over years of trial and error. The representative is everything you wish you were, and nothing that you actually are. Your representative is effortlessly charming. They are funny, but not too loud. They are mysterious, but not entirely closed off. They are casually independent, perfectly unbothered by delayed text messages, and immune to the messy, embarrassing realities of human emotion. When the representative goes on a date, they know exactly how to sit, exactly how to make eye contact, and exactly which heavily sanitized anecdotes from your past to share in order to appear deep, yet entirely healed. The representative does not have a messy bedroom. The representative does not lie awake at 3 in the morning, paralyzed by the fear that their life is slipping through their fingers. The representative does not have irrational, suffocating anxiety, or a history of depressive episodes, or a deep, lingering fear of abandonment. The representative is smooth, unblemished, and completely invisible. We send the representative into the dating world because the representative is highly marketable. The representative knows how to secure affection, how to generate a spark, and how to make people fall in love with them. But there is a devastating, tragic flaw built into the very code of this transaction. If someone falls in love with your representative, they are not actually falling in love with you. They are falling in love with the hologram. They are falling in love with the hologram. They are falling in love with the PR campaign. And you know this. Deep down in the quiet, isolated core of your own mind, you know that the affection you are receiving is fraudulent, because the version of you receiving it does not actually exist. You cannot absorb the love they are giving you, because you are wearing a suit of armor, and the warmth of their hands never actually touches your skin. This is where the sheer crushing exhaustion of modern dating comes from. When you are projecting a hologram, you are burning a staggering, unsustainable amount of emotional electricity. You have to constantly monitor your own behavior to ensure that the mask does not slip. You have to analyze every single text message you send, running it through a filter to make sure it sounds like the representative and not like the terrified, anxious child hiding behind the curtain. Think about the feeling of coming home after a third or fourth date. You unlock your front door, you step inside your empty apartment, and the moment the deadbolt clicks shut, you physically collapse. You slide down the wall and sit on the floor, completely and utterly drained. You are not just physically tired, your soul is exhausted. You have just spent 4 hours performing your own existence. You have just spent 4 hours holding your breath underwater, pretending to be a fish, and now that you are finally back on dry land, your lungs are burning. You cannot sustain the performance forever. Time is the absolute undefeated enemy of the mask. In the beginning, you can maintain the illusion because there is distance. You only see them for a few hours at a time. You can retreat to your fortress, recharge your batteries, fix the cracks in the armor, and send the representative back out into the field the next day. But attachment is the gravitational pull that closes the distance. As the connection deepens, the spaces between the performances get smaller and smaller. They start sleeping over. They start occupying your space on Sunday mornings when you are tired, unguarded, and lacking the energy to project the hologram. They start seeing you when you are stressed about work, when you are sick, when you are dysregulated. Proximity acts as a solvent. It slowly, inevitably dissolves the glue holding the mask to your face. And this is the exact moment the panic of being perceived becomes a roaring, deafening siren in your ears. You hate getting attached because you know that attachment means the unmasking is imminent. You know that if you let them stay, they are eventually going to see the real you. And this brings us to the deepest, darkest, most heavily guarded secret of the avoidant mind. It is the absolute core of the preemptive strike, the flaw hunt, and the hyper-independence. The real reason you hate getting attached is not that you are afraid they will leave. It is that you are absolutely, fundamentally terrified that they will finally see who you actually are, and they will realize they have been tricked. You suffer from a profound existential imposter syndrome regarding your own lovability. Beneath the cool, detached exterior of the representative, you harbor a deep, sickening conviction that you are inherently defective. You believe that your true self, the messy, anxious, hypersensitive, deeply flawed person sitting behind a control panel, is entirely unlovable. You look at the person across from you. You see how much they care about the representative, and a wave of guilt and terror washes over you. You think, if they knew how broken I actually am, if they knew how much anxiety I'm currently hiding from them, they would be repulsed, yet pack their bags immediately. I'm scamming them. I'm selling them a luxury car with a completely rotted engine, and the moment they look under the hood, this entire thing is over. This is the Panopticon of intimacy. The Panopticon was a theoretical prison designed by philosophers where a single guard in the central tower could watch every single inmate at all times without the inmates knowing exactly when they were being looked at. The genius of the Panopticon was that the constant, looming threat of being observed forced the inmates to police their own behavior. When you hate getting attached, a relationship becomes your personal Panopticon. You feel like you are constantly under a spotlight. You feel like every word you say, Every emotion you express and every reaction you have is being heavily scrutinized by the person you are dating. You project your own ruthless, hypercritical self-hatred onto them. Because you despise the messy, unpolished parts of yourself, you automatically assume that they are going to despise those parts too. If you have a bad day and snap at them, you don't just see it as a normal human mistake, you see it as the mask slipping, revealing the monster underneath. You immediately assume they are taking notes, building a case against you, preparing to leave now that they have seen your true colors. You become completely paralyzed by the pressure to maintain the illusion of perfection. And the tragic irony is that the person sitting across from you is not a prison guard. They are not sitting in a tower with a clipboard grading your performance or waiting for you to fail. They are just a human being who is trying to love you. They probably already know that you're messy. They probably already sense the anxiety humming beneath your skin. And if they are a safe, consistent partner, they don't care. They actually want to see the real you, because you cannot build a life with a hologram. But your trauma refuses to let you believe that. Your trauma tells you that unconditional love is a myth. It tells you that affection is entirely conditional upon your ability to remain flawless, low maintenance, and perfectly entertaining. So, you face an agonizing, paralyzing dilemma. If you keep the mask on, you guarantee that you'll never actually be loved, because they are only loving a projection. You will remain perfectly safe, but entirely alone inside your own relationship, suffocating under the weight of the performance. If you take the mask off, you open the door to true intimacy, but you also open the door to the most devastating, fatal rejection a human being can possibly experience. Think about the mathematics of this rejection. If you send your representative out into the world and someone rejects the representative, it stings, but it doesn't destroy you. Your ego can easily absorb that blow. You can tell yourself, they just didn't like my sense of humor, or they just weren't my type. Because they rejected the avatar, your true self remains entirely shielded and safe in the bunker. But what happens if you drop the mask? What happens if you look them in the eye, strip off the armor, and lay your actual, beating, bruised, unedited heart on the table? What happens if you show them the anxiety, the fear, the clinginess, the messy, chaotic reality of your actual soul? If you show them the real you, and they look at it, and they say, no thank you, this is too much, I don't want this. That is not just a breakup, that is a psychological assassination. If your true self is rejected, there is no defense left, there is no defense left, there is no PR spin, there is no way to blame it on the avatar. It is the ultimate undeniable confirmation of your deepest, darkest fear that you are in fact inherently unlovable, that the core wound was right all along, that you are fundamentally broken, and that no one will ever be able to tolerate the reality of who you are. This is why you run. This is why you sabotage. This is why you execute the preemptive strike. You do not destroy the relationship because you don't care. You destroy the relationship because the risk of being seen and then rejected is a gamble you literally cannot afford to make. Your psychological bank account cannot cover the cost of that potential devastation. It is a twisted, heartbreaking act of self-preservation. You would rather starve to death in the dark than risk walking into the light and being told you aren't allowed to eat at the table. And so, you start punishing them for trying to look at you. When they ask you deep questions, you deflect with humor. When they try to hold you after a long, exhausting day, you physically stiffen, pulling away because their tenderness feels like a spotlight shining directly onto the parts of yourself you hate the most. When they tell you that they love you, you feel a sickening wave of guilt and anxiety because you feel like a fraud accepting a prize you didn't actually earn. You start to view their intimacy as an invasive procedure. You push them away, not because you want them gone, but because you want the spotlight turned off. You want to retreat back into the shadows where you don't have to perform, where you don't have to hold your breath, and where you don't have to live in the constant agonizing terror of being found out. You tell yourself that you are just fiercely independent. You tell yourself that you just prefer your own company. You tell the world that you are a lone wolf, entirely unbothered by the messy entanglements of romance. But the truth, the raw bleeding truth that you refuse to look at, is that you are terrified of being perceived. You are a museum that is desperately proud of its art, but you have barricaded all the doors, boarded up all the windows, and turned off all the lights, entirely convinced that if anyone actually walked the halls, they would demand a refund for their ticket, and the tragedy of the mask is that it becomes a permanent fixture. It stops being something you wear on dates, and it starts being the only face you know how to present to the world. You wear it with your friends. You eventually start wearing it when you are completely alone, lying to yourself about what you actually want, entirely disconnected from the raw beating heart of your own existence. You successfully avoid the pain of rejection. You successfully ensure that no one ever gets close enough to see the flaws in your foundation. You keep the fortress perfectly secure. But a fortress with no doors is just a tomb. You are keeping yourself entirely safe from the heartbreak of the world, while simultaneously executing a slow, agonizing suffocation of your own soul. You are starving for connection, dying of thirst for just one moment of true unfiltered visibility, but you absolutely refuse to open your mouth to drink. You hate getting attached because attachment is the only force in the universe powerful enough to rip the mask off your face. And until you are willing to stand in the light, completely unshielded, and risk the terrifying possibility that the real you is actually worthy of being looked at, you will spend the rest of your life haunting your own relationships. A ghost who is desperately trying to be loved, but absolutely terrified of being seen. There's a very specific, incredibly dangerous compliment that we hand out freely in modern society, completely unaware of the psychological damage it actively encourages. We look at the person who never asks for a favor, who handles their own crises in absolute silence, who pays their own bills, fixes their own flat tires, and processes their own grief behind a locked door, and we applaud them. We call them strong. We call them fiercely independent. We build entire cultural aesthetics around the concept of the lone wolf. We glorify the person who walks away unbothered, who needs absolutely nobody, and who wears their self-sufficiency like a badge of honor. We treat this extreme level of independence as the ultimate virtue of human maturity. But if you are the person receiving that compliment, if you are the one standing on that pedestal of absolute self-reliance, you know the dark, exhausting truth that the rest of the world is completely blind to. You know that your hyper-independence is not a virtue. It is not a superpower. It is a trauma response. To understand the tragedy of hyper-independence, you have to look at the foundational biology of the human species. Human beings are, at our absolute core, pack animals. We are biologically, neurologically wired for co-regulation. Our nervous systems are designed to seek out the presence of others to help us process fear, pain, and stress. When an infant is crying, they cannot soothe themselves. They require the physical touch and regulated heartbeat of a caregiver to bring their own heart rate down. That biological need for external support does not magically evaporate the moment we turn 18. We are designed to lean on each other. We are designed to need people. So what has to happen to a human being to make them actively, aggressively fight against their own biological programming? What level of pain is required to make a person look at the fundamental human instinct to ask for help and violently shut it down? You are not born a lone wolf. You are forged into one. Hyper-independence is a direct result of a child or a young adult learning a very specific, very devastating lesson. Relying on other people is dangerous. Think back to the origin story of your independence. It didn't start with a triumphant desire to conquer the world alone. It started with a letdown. It started with a moment when you were incredibly vulnerable. When you reached your hand out into the dark, desperately needing someone to catch you, and your hand closed around absolutely nothing. Maybe you grew up in an environment where your caregivers were emotionally unavailable, constantly overwhelmed by their own crises, forcing you to become the adult in the room before you even knew how to tie your own shoes. You learned that bringing your problems to them only made things worse. So you learned to swallow your tears, fix your own mistakes, and make yourself entirely invisible so you wouldn't be a burden. Maybe you learned it later in life, in a relationship where every single time you asked for support, it was weaponized against you. You learned that receiving help always came with a hidden price tag. If someone did you a favor, it was immediately added to an invisible ledger, and it would inevitably be thrown back in your face during the next argument. You learned that depending on someone meant giving them the ammunition they would eventually use to destroy you. Whatever the specific origin, the conclusion your brain reached was exactly the same. The bridge will always collapse. The safety net has a hole in it. If I rely on anyone other than myself, I will be dropped. And so, your nervous system made a radical, sweeping executive decision to ensure your survival. It decided that from that moment forward, you would never ever put yourself in a position to be dropped again. You will become the safety net. You will become the bridge. You would construct a life so completely, hermetically sealed in its own self-sufficiency, that you would never have to experience the agonizing humiliation of unmet needs. This is how the armor of hyper-independence is cast. In the context of dating and attachment, this trauma response becomes an insurmountable, invisible wall. You hate getting attached because attachment, by its very definition, requires reliance. Intimacy is the act of looking at someone and saying, I cannot do this entirely on my own, and I am trusting you to hold a piece of the way. For you, saying those words feels like a physical impossibility. It feels like stepping off a cliff and hoping gravity suddenly stops working. When you start dating someone, you refuse to let them do anything for you. If you're having a terrible day at work, you don't call them to vent. You turn your phone off, process the stress entirely alone in your apartment, and then text them 3 hours later when you have perfectly re-regulated your emotions, pretending everything is fine. If you need a ride to the airport, you will gladly pay $80 for an Uber rather than endure the excruciating, skin-crawling discomfort of asking them for a favor. You convince yourself that you are just being polite. You tell yourself that you are being a low-maintenance partner. You pride yourself on the fact that you bring absolutely no drama, no baggage, and no logistical burden to the relationship. But you are not being polite. You are keeping them out. When you refuse to let someone help you, when you refuse to let them see you in a state of need, you are actively denying them the opportunity to love you. Love is not just standing next to someone when the sun is shining. Love is the act of holding the umbrella when it rains. By aggressively insisting that you can hold your own umbrella, you are rendering their presence entirely decorative. You make them feel utterly useless, and you do this on purpose, because if they are useless to your survival, their eventual departure would not threaten your survival. If you don't need them to pay the bills, fix the flat tire, or regulate your anxiety, then when they walk out the door, nothing in your structural foundation will collapse. You are immunizing yourself against the pain of their absence by ensuring that their presence never actually holds any structural weight. But this extreme level of self-protection breeds a deeply transactional view of human connection. When you are hyper-independent, you operate under the strict, unrelenting laws of the emotional ledger. You view every interaction, every favor, and every act of kindness as a debt. If someone buys you a cup of coffee, you immediately feel a spike of anxiety. You cannot simply accept the coffee as a gesture of care. You immediately calculate exactly how and when you are going to buy them a coffee in return so you can balance the ledger and clear the debt. You live in absolute sheer terror of owing anyone anything, because in your trauma-wired brain, debt equals leverage. If you owe someone, they have power over you. If they have power over you, they control you, manipulate you, or hurt you. So you rush to pay back every single emotional and physical favor the exact second it is offered. You compliment them back immediately. You buy the next round of drinks. You aggressively refuse gifts. You think this makes you a fair, balanced person. But what it actually makes you is entirely impenetrable. By constantly balancing the ledger, you're essentially telling the person you are dating, I will not allow you to invest in me. I will not allow you to build equity in this relationship. We will remain entirely separate entities, operating at a net zero balance at all times. You are treating a romantic relationship like a corporate merger between two fiercely competing companies, both terrified of a hostile takeover. And the reality of living this way is profoundly, devastatingly exhausting. The cultural narrative stops at the compliment. Society sees the lone wolf walking away unbothered, applauds their strength, and then turns the camera off. But society doesn't see what happens when the lone wolf actually gets back to their den. Society doesn't see the crushing, invisible physical toll that hyper-independence takes on the human body. Carrying the entire weight of your existence completely alone, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, is a miserable way to live. It manifests in your physical body. It is the chronic tension in your shoulders that never goes away, no matter how much you stretch or rest, because your nervous system is permanently locked in a state of bearing weight. It is the jaw clenching in your sleep. It is the sheer, overwhelming fatigue that washes over you on a Sunday afternoon. A fatigue that sleep cannot cure, because you are not just tired of doing things. You are tired of being the only one doing them. Think about what happens when you get sick. For a securely attached person, getting a terrible flu is unpleasant, but it is also an opportunity to be cared for. They call their partner or their mother or their best friend. Someone brings them soup. Someone runs to the pharmacy. Someone sits on the edge of the bed and puts a cool hand on their forehead. They surrender to the sickness, allowing the people who love them to take the wheel for a few days. But when you are hyper-independent, getting sick is a psychological crisis. You wake up with a fever in your empty apartment, and the very first thing you feel is a spike of intense, suffocating vulnerability. You realize you are physically incapacitated, and there is no one coming to save you. You refuse to call the person you are dating because you don't want them to see you weak, unwashed, and dependent. You don't want to be an inconvenience, so you drag your own aching, feverish body out of bed. You put on a coat, you walk to the pharmacy yourself, gripping the aisles to stay upright, and you buy your own medicine. You go back home, you make your own soup, and you lie in the dark, shivering, entirely alone. And as you lie there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, the lie of hyper-independence finally breaks. You tell the world that you don't need anyone. You tell the people you date that you like your space, that you prefer to handle things alone, that you are fiercely, proudly self-sufficient. You project this impenetrable, ironclad persona of a person who has conquered the human need for connection. But as the fever burns and the silence of the apartment presses down on you, the deepest, most heavily guarded truth of your soul bubbles to the surface. You don't want to be this strong. You are so incredibly tired of being strong. You are exhausted by the constant vigilance. You are sick of being your own safety net, your own emergency contact, your own sole provider of comfort. You are tired of holding the sky up with your bare hands, terrified that if you let your arms drop for even a single second, the entire atmosphere will crush you. The tragic irony of the lone wolf is that the lone wolf does not actually want to be alone. The lone wolf just convinced themselves that the pack was too dangerous to trust. Beneath the heavy armor of your independence, beneath the cold transactional ledger, beneath the pristine, self-sufficient representative you send out on dates, there is a very small, very tired part of you that is desperately begging to be held. You want, more than anything in the entire world, for someone to walk into the room, look at the massive, crushing weight you have been carrying for the last 10 years, gently pry it out of your hands and say, "I've got this. You can sit down now. You can rest." You crave dependency with the exact same ferocity with which you avoid it. You hate getting attached because you know that if you ever actually let someone in, if you ever actually drop the bags and let someone else carry the weight, you will become completely, hopelessly addicted to the relief. You know that the moment you experience the profound, grounding safety of being truly supported, you will never be able to go back to the freezing isolation of the fortress. And if you let yourself need them and they eventually realize they don't want to carry the weight anymore and they walk away, they will take your newly discovered peace with them. You will be left standing in the cold, forced to pick up the impossibly heavy bags all over again. And you know, with absolute certainty, that your arms simply do not have the strength to lift them a second time. This is the psychological gridlock of hyper-independence. You are starving for a home, but you are absolutely terrified that the roof is going to cave in. So you choose to sleep outside in the freezing rain, convincing yourself that the cold makes you tough, convincing yourself that you prefer the harsh elements to the warmth of a fire that might one day burn out. But the rain is slowly eroding your spirit. The cold is seeping all the way down into your bones. You cannot outsmart the biological imperative of human connection. You cannot optimize your life to the point where you no longer require love, support, and profound, messy vulnerability. You can build the thickest walls in the world, you can pay your own bills, you can fix your own tires, and you can process your own grief in silence, but you will never ever be able to silence the quiet, desperate ache in your chest when you look across a crowded room and realize that absolutely no one in it really knows you. Your hyper-independence kept you alive when you were in a war zone. It was a brilliant, necessary, flawless survival tactic when you were dealing with people who could not be trusted. But the war is over. You are an adult now. You are no longer trapped in the environment that required you to be a fortress. The people you are dating are not the people who originally dropped you. They are not the ones who taught you that reliance was a trap. When you continue to wear the heavy iron armor of hyper-independence into safe, loving relationships, you are no longer protecting yourself from the enemy. You are actively fighting the rescue team, You're looking at a person who is holding a blanket, offering you a warm place to finally rest your exhausted bones, and you are treating them like a threat. You are executing the preemptive strike. You are initiating the flaw hunt. You are retreating into the freezing dark, entirely out of habit. To break the cycle of self-sabotage, you have to do the most terrifying thing a hyper-independent person can possibly do. You have to intentionally, deliberately, put yourself in a position of need. You have to start small. You have to ask them to pick up a coffee on their way over. You have to tell them about a stressful email at work before you have fully processed it yourself. You have to look them in the eye when you are having a terrible day, and instead of saying, "I'm fine," you have to force the agonizing, unfamiliar words out of your throat. "I am struggling right now, and I need you." It will feel like swallowing glass. Your nervous system will scream at you. Your alarm bells will ring. Your brain will tell you that you are making a fatal mistake, that you are giving away your leverage, that you are about to be humiliated. But you have to do it anyway, because the only way to prove to your traumatized nervous system that the bridge isn't going to collapse is to actually walk out onto the middle of it and stand there. You have to let them show up for you. You have to let them hold the umbrella. You have to allow the ledger to become completely, beautifully unbalanced, trusting that real love does not keep a score. You have been strong for so long. You have carried the entire world on your shoulders with an absolute, devastating grace. You have proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that you are capable of surviving entirely on your own. You have nothing left to prove to the darkness. It is time to find out what happens when you finally let someone else hold the sky. There is a specific, hauntingly quiet sound that defines the exact moment your self-sabotage is finally complete. It is not the sound of a screaming argument, or the shatter of a broken plate, or the dramatic slamming of a car door. It is the soft, metallic, entirely unremarkable click of the deadbolt sliding into place on your own front door. You have executed the preemptive strike. You have pulled away. You have manufactured the distance. You have built the case against them, and you have finally watched them walk out of your life. And now, you are standing in the hallway of your apartment. You turn the lock, you take a step back, and you breathe in the absolute, overwhelming silence of the fortress. The immediate aftermath of retreating into isolation is a massive, intoxicating rush of synthetic peace. For someone who hates getting attached, this moment feels like surviving a shipwreck and finally washing up on the shore of a deserted island. You are bruised, you are exhausted, but you are alive. And more importantly, you are completely alone. You walk into your living room and the air feels incredibly light. There is no heavy, suffocating pressure of someone else's expectations weighing down the atmosphere. You do not have to check your phone to see if they texted you back. You do not have to run forensic analysis on their tone of voice. You do not have to compromise your schedule, share your space, or negotiate your emotional bandwidth. The remote control to your nervous system is sitting safely on your own coffee table, entirely within your grasp. You have successfully eliminated the threat. In the first few days, or even the first few weeks, the fortress feels like an absolute utopia. You reclaim your territory with a fierce, triumphant independence. You sleep in the exact center of your bed. You make your coffee exactly the way you like it, without having to ask if anyone else wants a cup. You spend your Friday nights in absolute solitude, watching the movies you want to watch, wearing comfortable, unglamorous clothes, entirely free from the agonizing Panopticon-like pressure of being perceived by someone who claims to love you. You look at this sanitized, perfectly regulated routine, and you convince yourself that this is the ultimate goal of human existence. You tell yourself that you have achieved the highest level of emotional maturity. You look out the window at the chaotic, messy, heartbroken world, at the people crying in their cars, fighting in restaurants, and agonizing over their relationships, and you feel a cold, detached sense of superiority. You think, look at them, tearing themselves apart over another person. Thank God I am above that. Thank God I am fiercely independent. Thank God my peace is protected. You rebrand your isolation as self-care. You call your heavily fortified walls boundaries. You convince yourself that because you are not experiencing pain, you must be experiencing happiness. But this is the great, devastating lie of the fortress. The absence of pain is not the same thing as the presence of joy. When you build walls thick enough to keep out the heartbreak, the anxiety, and the rejection, you are also building walls thick enough to keep out the awe, the surprise, the profound tenderness, and the breathtaking, chest-expanding high of true intimacy. You cannot selectively soundproof a room. If you block out the sirens, you also block out the symphony. You have traded the terrifying, unpredictable weather of human connection for a completely climate-controlled environment. Inside the fortress, the emotional temperature is permanently set to a comfortable, entirely unbothered 68 degrees. It is comfortable. It is safe. It is perfectly manageable. But you never ever get to feel the sun on your face. You never get to feel the chaotic electric charge of a summer storm. You never get to experience the raw, primal heat of a fire. You're existing in a permanent gray twilight, entirely protected from the elements, but entirely cut off from the very things that actually make a human being feel alive. To understand the tragedy of the fortress, you have to look at a heart monitor in a hospital room. When a human heart is beating, when it is healthy and alive, the line on the monitor is a chaotic, jagged series of massive peaks and massive valleys. It spikes upward and it crashes downward over and over and over again. The friction, the movement, the constant oscillation between the high and the low is the exact visual representation of life. What happens when the line goes completely flat? What happens when there are no more peaks and no more valleys? What happens when the line becomes perfectly smooth, perfectly predictable, and perfectly peaceful? The patient is dead. When you execute the preemptive strike and retreat into the fortress of isolation, you are emotionally flatlining yourself on purpose. You are looking at the jagged, terrifying peaks and valleys of a relationship. You are feeling the anxiety of the high and the terror of the low. And you are deciding that you would rather pull the plug on the entire machine than endure another oscillation. You choose the flatline because the flatline is safe. The flatline never surprises you. But existing on a flatline is not living. It is just a highly optimized, pain-free form of waiting for the end. As the weeks turn to months, the synthetic high of your newfound independence begins to slowly, inevitably evaporate. The novelty of sleeping in the center of the bed wears off. The triumph of not having to answer to anyone begins to curdle into a quiet, creeping sense of irrelevance. The silence of the fortress, which initially felt like a massive, relieving exhale, begins to feel like a vacuum. You sit in your living room on a Tuesday evening. You have finished your work. You have cooked your dinner. You have perfectly executed your optimized self-care routine. And now, you are just sitting there, staring at the wall, with absolutely nothing to fight, nothing to run from, and absolutely no one to share the room with. And in that deafening silence, you realize that you are starving. It is not a physical hunger. It is a deep, cellular, biological starvation for friction. It is the phenomenon of skin hunger, the profound, aching psychological distress that occurs when a human being goes for an extended period of time without being physically touched, held, or grounded by another nervous system. You can buy the softest blankets in the world. You can take the hottest showers. You could wrap yourself in every conceivable physical comfort, but none of it can replicate the specific, ancient, biological grounding that happens when another human being simply places the hand on your shoulder. You realize that you are entirely self-sufficient, but you are also entirely unheld. This is the moment the true cost of the preemptive strike finally comes due. You begin to look back at the connection you actively destroyed. You look back at the person you pushed away, the person you convinced yourself was flawed, annoying, and dangerous. But because the immediate threat of their proximity is gone, your defense mechanisms are no longer actively painting them as a villain. You start to remember the warmth. You remember the specific quiet comfort of sitting in the passenger seat of their car while they drove through the city at night. You remember the way they looked at you when you were speaking, with a level of attention and care that made you feel like you were the only person existing in the universe. You remember the exact heavy, grounding weight of their arm thrown over you in the middle of the night. You realize that in a desperate, frantic attempt to protect yourself from the possibility of a future funeral, you actually committed murder. You killed something beautiful, something rare, and something entirely real, simply because you did not know how to tolerate the anxiety of its survival. The fortress stops feeling like a sanctuary and starts feeling exactly like what it actually is, a prison. The most devastating realization you can have in the fortress is that you are not the king of the castle. You are the warden, and you are the inmate, all wrapped into one terrified, lonely body. You built the walls to keep the enemies out, but the enemies were never actually outside. The enemy was the trauma living inside your own head, and you just locked yourself in a windowless room with it. You are perfectly safe from the heartbreak of the world, but you are utterly defenseless against the heartbreak of your own mind. And the loneliness that creeps into the fortress is not a loud, dramatic loneliness. It is not the kind of loneliness where you fall to your knees and scream at the sky. It is a slow, insidious, suffocating dust that settles over everything you own. It is the loneliness of realizing that if you were to disappear tomorrow, it would take days for anyone to notice, because you have systematically trained the world to leave you alone. It is the loneliness of achieving something great at work, holding the good news in your mouth, and realizing you have absolutely no one to call who would genuinely, deeply care. It is the loneliness of watching a beautiful sunset, feeling a profound wave of awe, and having that awe curdle into sadness because the sunset is only half as beautiful when there is no one standing next to you to witness it. You have engineered a life entirely devoid of risk, but you have also engineered a life entirely devoid of stakes. You realize that a life without stakes is a life without meaning. If nothing can hurt you, then nothing can move you. If no one can break your heart, then no one can heal it. If you refuse to put your chips on the table, you will never lose a hand, but you will also never, ever win the game. You are just sitting in a casino watching everyone else play, convincing yourself that you are the smartest person in the room because you still have all your chips in your pocket, entirely blind to the fact that the chips are useless if you never actually spend them. And as the years pass inside the fortress, a deep, rotting sense of regret begins to set into the foundation. You start to look at the people you used to judge, the people who love too loudly, who get their hearts broken, who cry in public, who make messy, irrational, beautiful choices in the name of attachment. You used to think they were weak. You used to think they were foolish for handing their remote control over to someone else. But as you look out through the narrow slits of your fortress window, you realize they are not weak. They are incredibly, breathtakingly brave. They are incredibly, breathtakingly brave. They are in the arena. They are living. They're getting bruised, they're bleeding, they're failing, and they're trying again. They're experiencing the absolute staggering depth of the human condition. They're feeding the sun, and they're surviving the rain. And you are just staying dry. You are perfectly preserved, entirely unbruised, and completely empty. This is the ultimate tragic paradox of hyper-independence and the fear of attachment. You spend your entire life running from the possibility of abandonment only to end up abandoning yourself. You spend your entire life running from the pain of rejection only to end up rejecting the very experiences that make a human life worth living. You built a fortress to guarantee that no one could ever walk out on you, but in doing so you guarantee that no one could ever walk in. The walls are thick, the deadbolt is locked, the temperature is perfectly controlled. You have won the battle against vulnerability. You have successfully defended the perimeter. You are the sole, undisputed master of your completely empty domain. But as you sit on the floor of your living room, shivering in the cold, perfectly regulated air, surrounded by the absolute deafening silence of your own flawless self-preservation, you have to ask yourself the only question that actually matters anymore. You are safe, but what is the point of being safe if you're freezing to death? There is an absolute agonizing psychological gridlock that occurs when a human being is starved for love, but utterly terrified of being known. If you have spent your life executing the preemptive strike, running the Flaw hunt, and retreating into the freezing, heavily fortified safety of isolation, you eventually reach a breaking point. You sit in the absolute silence of your fortress, you feel the crushing, suffocating weight of your own loneliness, and you are forced to confront the deepest, most agonizing contradiction of your existence. You are entirely torn in two. One half of your soul, the quiet, hidden, desperately exhausted half, is screaming to be unconditionally loved. It is the part of you that watches romantic movies in the dark and cries. It is the part of you that looks at old couples holding hands in the grocery store and feels a sharp, physical ache in your chest. It is a part of you that is so incredibly tired of being strong, so tired of carrying the world on your own shoulders, and so desperate for someone to simply look at you, see the massive, heavy burden you are carrying, and offer to hold it for a while. You want the warmth. You want the deep, grounding safety of a secure attachment. You want to be held, understood, and chosen. But the other half of your soul, The heavily armed, hyper-vigilant, traumatized half is absolutely fundamentally terrified of being looked at. This is the bodyguard. This is the ego de trauma response, the architect of the sabotage. This half of you believes with absolute religious certainty that intimacy is a death sentence. It believes that the moment you drop the armor and let someone close enough to hold the weight, they will inevitably discover how flawed you are, and they will drop you. And when they drop you, you will not survive the impact. So, you are trapped in a perpetual violent tug-of-war between the deepest craving of your biology and the deepest terror of your psychology. This is the paradox of intimacy. You are dying of thirst standing directly in front of a fountain of fresh water, but you absolutely refuse to open your mouth because you are convinced the water is poisoned. To understand how devastating this paradox is, you have to look at how it actually manifests in your relationships. It is not just an internal feeling, it is a behavioral loop that drives the people who love you absolutely insane and eventually destroys the connection entirely. The paradox turns you into a moving target. When you're feeling the crushing weight of your loneliness, the inner child takes the steering wheel. You reach out. You send the text message. You ask for closeness, for reassurance, for intimacy. You tell the person you are dating that you need them, that you want to be close, that you want a deep, meaningful connection, and that they're a safe, loving person. They listen to you. They step forward. They offer you the exact reassurance you asked for. They bridge the gap. They show up. And they offer you the warmth of the fire. But the exact second they step forward, the exact moment they give you exactly what you asked for, the proximity triggers the alarm bells. The reality of their emotional availability registers as an immediate lethal threat to your nervous system. The intimacy you were just crying out for suddenly feels like a suffocating blanket being thrown over your face. So, you violently shove them away. You pull the rug out from under them. You go cold. You leave their texts on read, you cancel plans, you pick a fight, or you execute the flaw hunt. You punish them for stepping into the exact space you just invited them into. Imagine the absolute dizzying psychological whiplash this causes for the person on the other side. They are trying to follow your instructions. You say, "I am cold, please come closer." They step closer to share their warmth. You immediately scream, "You are suffocating me, get away." They take a step back, confused and hurt, giving you the space you demanded. And the moment they step back, the cold sets in again. And you cry out, "Why are you pulling away? You don't actually care about me. Everyone always leaves." You are a trap. You have engineered a scenario in which it is absolutely impossible for anyone to successfully love you. If they give you space, you feel abandoned, and your core wound of being unlovable is validated. If they step close and offer you unconditional love, you feel suffocated and terrified, and your survival instinct forces you to push them away. You win the argument against intimacy every single time, because you have rigged the game so that no matter what the other person does, they lose. But you don't just torture them, you torture yourself. The guilt that follows this cycle is astronomical. When you are sitting alone after pushing away a genuinely good person who was only trying to love you, the clarity of what you have just done crashes down on you. You realize that you are the villain in your own love story. You realize that you are actively breaking the hearts of the people who are trying to heal yours. You look at your own behavior and you feel a deep, rotting sense of shame. You think, "I am broken. There is something fundamentally, permanently wrong with my brain. I get exactly what I want. I get the healthy relationship I have been begging for, and my first instinct is to burn it to the ground. I am toxic. I am unlovable. I should just stay alone so I stop hurting people." This shame reinforces the isolation. It adds another layer of bricks to the fortress. You convince yourself that your isolation is actually an act of public service. You tell yourself that you are protecting the world from your own emotional instability. But you are not broken. You are just terrified, and you are fundamentally misunderstanding the physics of the fire. The metaphor of the fire is the most accurate way to describe the paradox of intimacy. When you are alone in the fortress, you are freezing. You are sitting in the dark, shivering, feeling the deep, agonizing ache of the cold in your bones. You look out the window, and you see a fire burning in the distance. It is bright, it is warm, and it represents everything you do not have because you are so cold. You romanticize the fire. You think about it obsessively. You write poetry about it. You convince yourself that if you could just get to the fire, all of your problems would be solved. You would finally be warm. You would finally be safe. So, you summon the courage. You unlock the heavy iron door of the fortress and you walk out into the dark. You walk toward the fire. As you get closer, you start to feel the ambient heat. It feels incredible. Your shivering stops. The ice in your chest begins to thaw. You feel a rush of euphoria, the intoxicating high of the beginning of the connection. You think, this is it. I finally found it. But then, you take one more step. You step directly to the edge of the flames. And suddenly, it isn't just warm anymore. It is hot. It is dangerously, overwhelmingly hot. Your nervous system registers the intense heat, and instantly, a deeply buried ancient memory is triggered. Your body remembers a time when you were burned. It remembers the devastating pain of a past betrayal, a childhood abandonment, or a relationship that completely destroyed you. Your brain does not distinguish between the safe fire in front of you and the dangerous fire from your past. It just registers the heat, and it sounds the alarm. Fire equals pain. Heat equals destruction. Run. You panic. You do not just take a step back to cool off. You turn around and sprint as fast as you physically can, all the way back to the fortress. You slam the door, lock the deadbolt, and collapse on the freezing floor, panting, your heart hammering in your chest. You sit there in the dark, shivering again. And you look out the window at the fire, and you whisper, I hate the cold. Why can't I just be warm like everyone else? You are blaming the fire for the fact that you do not know how to tolerate the heat. The paradox of intimacy is the failure to realize that you cannot experience the warmth of human connection without simultaneously exposing yourself to the possibility of the burn. They are a package deal. Intimacy is friction. Intimacy is heat. Intimacy is a terrifying, uncontrollable force of two entirely separate universes colliding in the dark. You cannot stand next to a fire and demand that it only warms your hands, but never threatens to singe your clothes. You cannot ask another human being to unconditionally love you, to hold your deepest insecurities, and to merge their life with yours, while simultaneously demanding that they never trigger your anxiety, never misunderstand you, and never make you feel vulnerable. When you push people away the second they give you what you want, you are operating under the delusion that there is a perfect person out there who will somehow circumvent this physics. You tell yourself that you just haven't found the right match. You tell yourself that when you finally meet the one, the anxiety will miraculously disappear. You believe that the right person will somehow radiate a magical, risk-free heat that perfectly thaws your heart without ever triggering your alarm bells. This is the greatest, most devastating lie the avoidant ego ever tells. The truth is the exact opposite. The right person, the safe, consistent, emotionally available, fiercely loving person will actually trigger alarm bells more than anyone else. When you date someone who is emotionally unavailable, someone who plays games, or someone who keeps you at arm's length, your defense mechanisms don't actually have to work that hard. You are already at a distance. The fire is contained. You can comfortably chase them because you subconsciously know you will never actually catch them. The chase feels like intimacy, but it is actually just a highly stimulating form of isolation. But when you date someone who is actually safe, when you date someone who puts their cards on the table, looks you in the eye and says, I am here, I am not leaving, and I want to know all of you, that is a 5-alarm psychological emergency. Safety is the most terrifying thing in the world to a nervous system that was wired in a war zone. When you have spent your entire life bracing for impact, the absence of an impact feels like a trap. You don't know how to navigate peace. You only know how to navigate peace. You only know how to navigate crisis. So, when someone offers you genuine peace, your brain assumes it is an ambush. You sabotage the safe relationship because you would rather create a crisis you can control than surrender to a peace that requires you to be completely disarmed. You will spend your entire life running from the exact people who could actually heal you, simply because their medicine tastes like the poison that originally made you sick. And until you understand this, until you can look at the paradox of your own desires and take accountability for the fact that you are the architect of your own starvation, you will never be able to break the cycle. You have to realize that the gridlock cannot be solved by changing the person sitting across from you. It cannot be solved by finding a better fire or a less intimidating flame. The paradox can only be solved internally. It requires you to stand in the freezing room, look at the heavy iron door of your fortress, and make a conscious, violent, radical decision to stop blaming the world for the fact that you are lonely. It requires you to look at the fire, acknowledge the absolute terrifying truth that it possesses the capacity to burn you to the ground, and choose to walk toward it anyway. It requires you to stand in the heat, feel the alarm bells ringing in your chest, feel every single muscle in your body screaming at you to run, and force yourself to plant your feet in the dirt and stay. You have to build a tolerance to the warp. You have to teach your nervous system that just because you feel exposed does not mean you are in danger. You have to teach your inner child that just because someone is looking at you does not mean they are preparing to strike. The paradox of intimacy is not a permanent diagnosis. It is just a highly reinforced habit of survival. But survival is not living. You have survived the cold. You have proved you can exist in the freezing dark. You have mastered the art of isolation, but the time for survival is over. You are standing on the edge of the rest of your life. The fire is burning. The person you love is standing in the light, their hand outstretched, waiting for you to make a choice. You can run. You can execute the preemptive strike. You can retreat back into the fortress, lock the deadbolt, and spend the next 50 years perfectly safe, perfectly in control, and entirely agonizingly empty. Or you can take a deep breath. You can drop the armor. You can step into the terrifying, unpredictable, beautiful heat of the flame, and you can finally find out what happens when you stop fighting the paradox and start allowing yourself to be loved. There's a moment of profound, absolute exhaustion that eventually arrives in the life of everyone who spends their time running away. You can only sprint for so long before your lungs give out. You can only execute so many preemptive strikes, burn so many bridges, and retreat into the freezing fortress of isolation so many times before the thrill of the escape completely loses its high. You reach a point where the heavy iron armor you wear to protect yourself from the world becomes heavier than the pain we're actually trying to avoid. You sit in the silence of your perfectly controlled, entirely unbothered, spectacularly lonely life, and you realize that the math of your survival strategy no longer adds up. You have successfully avoided the heartbreak of being abandoned, but you are currently dying of a broken heart anyway. You broke your own heart by refusing to let anyone hold it. This is the exact threshold of change. This is the moment where you have to look at the massive, terrifying expanse of the open field, look at the fire burning in the distance, and make the ultimate, radical decision. You have to decide if you are going to spend the rest of your life as a ghost, haunting the edges of human connection, or if you are finally going to step into the light and actually live. To step into the light, you have to make a radical bet. You have to accept the hardest, most devastating, and most liberating truth of human existence. It is a truth that the avoidant ego spends its entire life frantically trying to outrun, outsmart, and outmaneuver. Here is the truth. All human connection ends. There is absolutely no exception to this rule. There is no magical, perfectly optimized relationship that escapes the fundamental physics of the universe. Every single time you attach yourself to another human being, you are signing a contract that guarantees eventual pain. Every relationship you will ever have in your entire life will end in one of two ways. It will end in a breakup, or it will end in a funeral. You will either realize that you are incompatible, the love will fade, the bridge will collapse, and you will have to walk away from each other. Or you will build a beautiful, secure, lifelong connection. You will stay together for 60 years. You will share a home, a life, and a soul. And then one of you will physically die, leaving the other one entirely alone in the crushing, agonizing silence of the grief that is so profound it will alter the very structure of your DNA. Loss is the absolute, non-negotiable guarantee of love. When you truly internalize this, the entire architecture of self-sabotage begins to crumble. If you spend your entire life executing the preemptive strike to avoid the pain of an ending, you are fighting a battle that was lost the moment you were born. You cannot outsmart the end. You cannot engineer a life entirely free from grief, because grief is just the receipt you receive for having loved something. It is the bill that comes at the end of the meal. The avoidance strategy is to look at the cost of the meal, panic, and decide to starve to death in the alleyway behind the restaurant just to save the money. You think that by refusing to eat, you are winning the game, but you aren't winning. You are just hungry. You are starving yourself of the very experience that makes the human condition bearable. When you finally accept that the ending is inevitable, the fear of the ending loses its paralyzing power. If the ship is eventually going to sink, you stop obsessing over the lifeboats, and you finally start enjoying the cruise. You realize that the value of a connection is not measured by its permanence. A relationship does not have to last forever to be a spectacular success. If you love someone deeply for 2 years and they teach you how to open your heart and they hold a mirror up to your deepest insecurities and they make you feel seen for the very first time in your life, and then eventually you go apart and the connection ends, that was not a failure. That was a masterpiece. A sunset is not a failure because it only lasts for 20 minutes. A beautiful song is not a failure because it eventually fades into silence. The fear of attachment is rooted in the belief that an ending negates the beauty of the middle. You have to actively, aggressively unlearn that lie. You have to look at the fragile, temporary, incredibly risky nature of human connection and decide that the warmth of the fire is unconditionally, absolutely worth the eventual burn. This is the courage to stay, but courage is not a grand, cinematic epiphany. Courage does not happen in a sweeping montage accompanied by triumphant music. Courage is the most unglamorous, difficult, granular work a human being can do. Courage happens in the micro moments. It happens on a Tuesday evening when your phone lights up and you feel the familiar, terrifying drop in your stomach. It happens when the siren goes off in your nervous system, screaming at you that they are getting too close, that you are losing your autonomy, that you need to pull the ripcord and execute the escape plan. The courage to stay is the physical act of sitting on your hands. When your entire body is telling you to run, when the adrenaline is flooding your veins, and your brain is desperately begging you to start an argument, to ghost them, to find a flaw, to do anything to reclaim the remote control, you have to literally force yourself to remain seated. You have to look at your own panic, recognize it as an old ghost from a war that is already over, and refuse to take orders from it. You take a deep breath. You feel the anxiety. You do not try to suppress it, and you do not try to act on it. You just let it sit in the room with you. You tell yourself, I am terrified right now. I feel completely out of control. My brain is telling me that I am in danger. But I am not in danger. I am just loved, and I am not used to it. And then, instead of executing the slow fade, you pick up the phone. You text them back. You bridge the gap. Instead of hiding behind the slick, flawless, unbothered representative, you do the most terrifying thing in the world. You take the mask off. You look at the person across the table, and you tell them the truth. You say, I have a tendency to pull away when things get good. I am deeply afraid of being known. I am feeling incredibly anxious right now. Not because of anything you did, but because I care about you, and caring about you makes me feel entirely vulnerable. For someone who hates getting attached, saying those words feels like stepping in front of a firing squad. You are exposing your absolute softest underbelly. You are handing them the exact ammunition they will need to completely destroy you. You are inviting the Panopticon to look directly at your core wound. But you have to take the risk. You have to lay the armor down, because the magic of true intimacy, the profound, earth-shattering neural pathway rewiring, magic only happens after the mask is removed. When you show someone the terrified, anxious, messy, incredibly flawed reality of who you actually are, and you brace yourself for the inevitable rejection, the inevitable disgust, and instead they just look at you, and they reach across the table, and they hold your hand, they don't leave. They don't look at you with condescension, they just see you. The moment a human being witnesses your absolute worst fear about yourself and chooses to stay anyway, the entire foundation of your trauma begins to collapse. You realize that your core wound was a liar. You realize that you do not have to be perfect to be loved. You do not have to be self-sufficient, low maintenance, and entirely unbothered to be worthy of taking up space in someone else's life. You realize that the very flaws you were so desperately trying to hide are the exact things that make you human, and humanity is the only thing that can actually be connected with. You cannot connect with a hologram. You can only connect with a beating heart, and beating hearts are messy. This is the reward for surviving the panic. This is the warmth of the fire that you have been starving for your entire life. But you have to earn it. You have to pay the toll, and the toll is your pristine, untouchable independence. You have to mourn the loss of the fortress. You have to accept that you are never going to be perfectly safe again. When you choose to stay, you are choosing to walk to the world with a piece of your soul living outside of your body, walking around in the chest of another human being. You will worry about them when they drive home in the rain. You will feel a sharp physical pain in your own chest when they are grieving. You will lose sleep over their problems. You will experience the agonizing, beautiful inconvenience of a merged life. Your emotional baseline will no longer be a perfectly flat gray line. It will be the jagged, chaotic, massive peaks and valleys of a heart that is fully, aggressively alive. There will be days when the fear comes back. Healing is not linear. You will wake up some mornings, look at the person sleeping next to you, and feel the sudden, suffocating urge to pack your bags and run to the airport. The phantom roommate will whisper in your ear. The ick might try to resurface. The sirens will occasionally misfire. You are unlearning decades of survival mechanics, and the brain does not let go of its armor easily. But on those days, you have to look at the fear, and you have to make the choice all over again. Love is not a feeling you fall into once and coast on forever. Love is a radical daily decision. It is a decision to wake up every single morning, look at the terrifying fragility of the connection, look at the absolute certainty of eventual loss, and say, I choose this anyway. I choose you over the fortress. I choose the heat of the fire over the safety of the freezing dark. You have spent so much time being proud of your ability to leave. You have prided yourself on being the one who cares less, the one who walks away first, the one who never gets their heart broken because they never actually put it on the table. You have built an entire identity around your detachment. But leaving is easy. Leaving is the reflex of a frightened child. Leaving requires absolutely no depth, no resilience, and no strength. Anyone can run away. Anyone can burn a bridge. Anyone can find a flaw and use it as an excuse to retreat into the shadows. What actually takes strength is staying. It takes an immense, breathtaking, almost bodily amount of courage to stand in the open field without your armor and let yourself be entirely known. It takes courage to let someone hold the remote control. It takes courage to admit that you need them, to admit that their absence would devastate you, and to trust them with the fragile, beating machinery of your existence. So the next time the panic sets in, the next time the connection deepens, the boundary line is crossed and your nervous system screams at you to execute the preemptive strike, stop. Do not pick up the magnifying glass. Do not run the crisis simulation. Do not start the argument, and do not execute the slow fade. Seal in your hands. Breathe through the terror. Look across the room at the person who is trying to love you. Look at their beautifully flawed, entirely human face. Acknowledge the absolute staggering risk of what you are about to do. Acknowledge that they might break your heart. Acknowledge that the ending might destroy you. And then, with all the radical, defiant courage you have left in your exhausted soul, make the quiet, violent choice to stay. Step into the fire. Let the armor melt. Because you are right. You might get hurt. You might get burned. You might eventually lose it all. But for the very first time in your entire life, you will actually be warm.